Okay, so today I wanted to talk about a very, very broad concept, which is capitalism. Now, I wanted to make this a subject which we should all dive deep together to get an understanding of what's going right and what's going wrong. If you watch my Why I Wear a Mask video, I mentioned that we're entering into a new phase of capitalism. I wanted to share with you guys what I mean by that and what I think we all should be focusing on in the current world. If you guys haven't checked out my previous Why I Wear a Mask video, please check it out to get a better understanding about what I'm talking about. I'd like to make this video the first episode of this topic, and I would love to get your thoughts on how you think about this topic. I would like you to listen very carefully to this video and share your thoughts. For those of you who have been watching my videos, you may have noticed a few things about me. To recap a few points. Number one, I take the Federal Reserve's policies and the macro data very seriously when it comes to investing. Number two, I take into account of the absolute valuation of companies, such as price to earnings, EV over EBITDA, and financial metrics, such as net debt to EBITDA ratios, but I adjust those in accordance to how the monetary and fiscal policies play out. Number three, I value working experience a lot more than immediate money I have or I make. I'm a person who believes your inner strength is more important than your absolute investment returns. I believe that if you have the inner strength, money will follow. That's the reason why I'm still working hard in a company. Number four, I view money as one of many tools in this world to prove how well you're adapting to the current political environment and social system. I view it as a tool to test yourself, not an end goal. And number five, therefore, I don't think there's not much meaning in bragging how much money you have. The more you brag, the more insecure you are, which means that your inner strength is not there yet. Okay, so if you put that all together, what I'm trying to say is that having more money can definitely provide you a more comfortable life today. But what's more important is building your inner strength so that you can adapt to the current environment if our social system changes towards other directions under a drastic scenario. Also, valuation metrics and financials of companies are important, but these are just numbers which gets dragged and thrown around by the monetary system set by the Federal Reserve. Also, if you own a lot of money now, it's most likely because you're a person who is designed to be compatible with the current social system, or got lucky riding the Federal Reserve monetary system wave the right way. And it doesn't mean that you'll also do well if the social system or monetary policy changes towards a different direction. So you always need to be humble with what you have. This applies to me as well. Some of you might think that I'm wealthy, but it's really because I happen to do well in the schooling system, which is set by the current system, which led me to go to a good college. I happen to pick a job which is deeply embedded into the current capitalism system and can benefit off the current environment. And I also happen to leverage the Federal Reserve's monetary policies to gain a significant investment profit, which would not have been possible if the Federal Reserve didn't turn into a money printing machine. Okay, so based on what I said, these are some observations on the current system. Number one, if your passion for a job is something which is not deeply embedded into the current system and is far away from reaping the fruits of the Federal Reserve's monetary policies or the government policies, you'll most likely not make a lot of money. Of course, outliers exist, but I'm just trying to lay out a general perception. And number two, there's no set formula in picking the companies which will yield the most return when investing. Depending on the Federal Reserve's monetary policies and government bills, companies with negative earnings can also do well in terms of investment profits. And even if a company makes billions of dollars in profits every year, if you don't grow at an impressive rate, the company might get left behind. Number three, if you don't ride the Federal Reserve's monetary policy wave correctly, it may act against you, and that gap, which may happen between the ones who ride it the right way and the ones who don't, may be so significant that however hard you work, the gap may be impossible to be caught up in the near to mid-term. And number four, unless the current social system changes significantly, this imbalance will continue to happen and will continue to impact people's lives. However, social systems and the nature of the market changes all the time, so you need to train your inner strength so that you can be prepared for all scenarios. Okay, so if you look at the points I made, basically what I'm trying to say is that the current social system is so heavily driven by the Federal Reserve, the government policies, and the macro environment. And it's to the extent that a person's success is also quite heavily correlated with those policies. Depending on how savvy you are with positioning yourself in accordance with those policies, your monetary success will also heavily depend on it. Okay, so basically, we're living in a world where a regular job is failing to provide meaningful value to people. You need to either, number one, find a job which fits well into the current social system, or number two, you need to leverage your income to invest to ride the wave of the Federal Reserve's monetary policies to gain some monetary profits. You can choose to either do both or one of the two, but if you don't do any of the two, your financial position will most likely be squeezed in the current society. I dealt a bit about this in my honest advice to Gen Zs and Millennials video. I said that while investing is necessary, success only comes with a mindset with a lot of patience which can be gained with work experiences. Thus, I promoted that work experience is very important, and sticking to a job for more than 3 years will equip you a lot mentally. Okay, so back to the topic. You might feel by now that our society is heading towards a weird direction. Hard labor doesn't necessarily lead to a more comfortable life, and even if you invest in the wrong direction against the policies of the Federal Reserve and the government, you might fail. And why is this? So this is the main topic I want to cover in today's video. Why do we feel like our society is failing? And by the way, this is just my personal assessment, so you may have different views, so please just consider it as my subjective opinion. Okay, so when humanity came up with this concept, capitalism, it seemed like a good idea. However, it had two problems to solve. Number one, unemployment, and number two, distribution. Under a capitalistic society, not everyone can be employed. Either voluntarily or involuntarily, somebody will be left behind. This was a problem for capitalism. Also, under a capitalistic society, not everyone can be distributed equally. There could also be people who don't get distributed at all. These two problems were the ones which people were trying to solve for. However, when capitalism first emerged, the system was working so well that there was no need for people to worry about unemployment and distribution. If the system yields so much growth and efficiency, small unemployment and some unequal distribution should be ignored for the greater good, right? That's what's been happening until recent days. Now, in order for capitalism to work well and yield strong growth, we always need a strong driver. The driver can be anything. It could be a product, a concept, an idea, or anything which can provide people with more jobs and distribution. Now, this is how I define the growth drivers of each stage of our history since capitalism emerged. Now, until 1920s, capitalism emerged. The growth drivers were all over the place. People started using steam power and started building railroads by using steel. Basically, modernization of cities and civilization was the driver of capitalism. And practically speaking, everyone who wanted a job had a job, and everyone who worked hard were rewarded. Now, from 1920s to 1970s, this is when capitalism really started to pick up speed. Mass production started taking place from the factories which were built. Cars were being manufactured, and household appliances were being manufactured for people all over the world. Basically, mass production was the driver of capitalism. And even during this period, everyone who wanted a job had a job, and the middle class were generally okay. Obviously, there were some one-off events like the Great Depression and the World War II, but apart from those very specific eras, the system was okay because we had a strong growth driver. Now, coming into the 1980s to 2000, while mass production was still ongoing, but not as fast as before, we had a new growth driver, and that was the internet. The dot-com boom, which really picked up in the 1990s, created massive amount of new jobs and opportunities for people who wanted success. Basically, this internet concept was bringing the world once more together and making the whole system more efficient and fast-running like an extra engine applied on the system. The job opportunities and rewards which the internet brought to the world was massive, and that's how the capitalism system continued to survive. Obviously, there was the collapse of the dot-com companies in the stock market, but the innovation and the concept itself was something that continued to drive the world. Now, coming into 2000s to 2008, the world was desperately looking for a new growth driver. Basically, after the emergence of the internet, the world was losing steam again and needed something which can keep the world going. Now, people started turning their heads towards the financial market. And given there was nothing tangible that was introduced during this era, people started becoming speculative and started heavily distributing derivative products such as the mortgage-backed securities and collateralized debt obligations. Basically, because there was so little new innovations, people were now focusing on making money with money. Nothing innovative or nothing tangible or nothing that helps our lives in the real world, but these products were really working. Basically, if more financial instruments are printed on top of underlying assets and even other financial instruments, that generated more liquidity in the market and actually made companies seemingly wealthier and more powerful. Of course, this was only on paper, but still, it actually generated jobs and opportunities for people across many industries. However, this didn't last long and collapsed altogether in 2008, with Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns failing. Coming into 2008 until late 2010s, post the failure of the derivative products, the world was really now devastated. Therefore, the Federal Reserve and the government now really started to step into the market because of these reasons. Number one, derivative products failing in 2008 left a lot of damages, but providing more liquidity into the system actually proved to work. Back in 2000s, it was the financial institutions who were actually selling these derivatives, so they had the chance to fail. But what if the almighty Federal Reserve injects money into the system directly? I mean, the Fed is not going to fail unless the entire world fails, so it sounded very plausible. Also, number two, while liquidity was all over the place in early 2000s until 2008, despite all this money leveraged on money and even more money being leveraged on more money, there was no significant impact on the inflation. This basically meant that because the world is so perfectly and efficiently running with no monopoly industries, the market was sustaining the price level of goods even if there were artificial money being injected into the system. Now, this is why the Fed decided to commence the quantitative easing program. This was the genesis of everything which got us here. However, while the Federal Reserve was commencing this weird scheme, a super good news hit the market at the same time. Basically, the news was that an innovation which is as impactful as the internet and industrial revolution just came out into the market. And that was the smartphone. Basically, the smartphone changed lives of every single person on the planet, and it not only generated many jobs, but also took the world to a whole new level, which changed the concept and the behaviors of everything. So that's how capitalism survived until late 2010s from 2008. Quantitative easing and smartphones. Now, coming into 2020s, even smartphone was now losing steam, and COVID-19 happened. As there were no new innovations introduced into the market, the Federal Reserve inevitably had to conduct an even more massive QE program to sustain the system. The world had nothing. It had no industrial revolution. It had no new massive production. It had no new financial system. It had no smartphone-like innovations. And all there was left to the world was this quantitative easing. The whole world was now relying only on this QE to sustain the system. However, it actually worked for a couple of years. From 2020 to 2022, just like in 2008 onward, it generated jobs and opportunities, and the artificial money even distributed money to the low-income people. So everything looked good. And the world was probably thinking, oh, we don't need any more innovations or new breakthroughs. As long as we have QE, we're good. Let's just do QE forever. However, a major problem happened, and that was the inflation. Inflation emerged for the first time after many decades, and it really proved that unlimited QE is also something that does not work. Okay, so where does that bring us today? Basically, today's world has no innovation, no new products, no new smartphone-like breakthroughs, and even worse, even QE is not a viable option anymore. So the world is left with nothing. Now, under this environment, unemployment is bound to go up given the world's growth rate slows significantly. And unequal distribution is bound to get worse. But the world has no solutions to it. The only breakthrough and innovation that came out in the world very recently is AI. However, this new innovation is making the system even worse given it only contributes towards cutting more jobs. This means that it only expedites more unemployment and even more unequal distribution. Okay guys, so that's where we are today. I wanted to go through the history of how our market evolved and get a sense of why we're all feeling like the system is somewhat going towards a wrong direction. In my next videos, I'll cover what is needed to keep this capitalism system going, how inequality happens among people, and where I think the world will head next. I hope you enjoyed the videos, and I'll be back with more videos very soon.